beat writer drama as the San Francisco Chronicle disputes the Athletics report that we talked about yesterday with regards to Farhan Zaidi not being trusted to close out the Matt Chapman extension. So what does the Chronicle have to say about the situation? It's different.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show for over 5.5 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And where we get started is by introducing you to this juicy bit of beat writer drama, which is that the San Francisco Chronicle basically disputed the Athletics report that we spent basically all of yesterday's episode talking about. In case you missed it, first of all, I encourage you to go back and listen to the episode. Even though that report is being disputed, it's still really interesting. It's still a really interesting topic, and I'm sure some of it is correct. And Andrew Baggerly of The Athletic reported that ownership was like, quote, so frustrated. I'll pull the quote up right here. He said, according to industry sources, the Giants executive board led by Buster Posey became so frustrated by the lack of immediate progress between Zaidi and agent Scott Boras after talks began regarding the Matt Chapman extension in August that the ownership group took action. Sources says Posey personally dealt with Chapman to hammer out the basic structure of the contract, blah, 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 blah. And then he said, it was an ownership group that viewed re-signing Chapman as a slam dunk and did not trust Zaidi and Boras to finish at the rim. Okay, so that was a report that made me say things like I felt more confident than ever that Farhan Zaidi was not going to stick around after the season and that he would be fired. But we've got a conflicting report in the San Francisco Chronicle. Both John Shea and Susan Slusser, very legitimate reporters, as is Baggerly, with this story. So they say, quote, according to industry sources, the Giants board of directors wanted to assess... Okay, this is actually different, but this is where they start. They wanted to assess how... So they're commenting on Zaidi's status first, when they don't dispute that it's in question moving forward. They say, according to industry sources, the Giants board of directors wanted to assess how the season's final weeks played out before making a decision on Zaidi, and the 2024 campaign is not ending well. Ownership is frustrated with the direction and performance of the team and is taking a hard look at Zaidi as he concludes the penultimate year of his contract. They continue to say Zaidi has continued to work despite being hospitalized twice in recent weeks with an undisclosed ailment. From the hospital, he conducted business as usual, including negotiating Matt Chapman's new contract. So that's wild. And I just want to interject and say, no matter how you feel about the man, like, I wish him, obviously a speedy recovery and full health. I don't know what's going on, but that's scary to hear. And to hear that he's doing, this contract from the hospital is kind of incredible. But to the controversial part, they say industry sources said the board will do Oh, it's not yet the controversial part. We'll get there very shortly. Industry sources said the board will do what it considers best for the organization, regardless of Zaidi's contract status. So he's under contract for next year, and then there's like a team option for him for 2026. And they point out that the Chronicle was the first to report that 2026 year is not guaranteed. But getting to... Oh, they also say the Chronicle also reported last week that the board will heavily rely on Buster Posey, who joined the board 2 years ago, and will have a significant voice on what happens at the top of the baseball operations department. So that's significant. But then here we go. Boras, this is a quote, Boras took issue with, and then I'm saying the Athletic story about the Matt Chapman deal, the characterization of how that deal came together, quote, saying that the Athletic did not contact him for the story, and that, quote, from Boras, any report that suggests that Farhan and I did not negotiate the financial package is inaccurate. And then the Chronicle continues, Boras added, quote, the years and guarantee totals presented to Matt were a product of a 2-week negotiation conducted with Farhan and me while he was in and out of the hospital. As with most long-term contracts, once you have an agreement on financial terms, there are ancillary contract terms, guarantee language, no trade provisions, charitable donations, signing bonus, and salary payment structure that are commonly completed by other team officials. And then Zaidi says, quote, to get a deal done, it's important to leverage personal connections. Bob Melvin talked a lot to Matt. Buster talked to Matt. I even referenced that in the press conference. It's not a secret. And then the Chronicle says, Boras never spoke with Posey during the negotiations, but said Posey texted Chapman and asked if he had any questions about the direction of the team. Zaidi can't legally speak with a player during a negotiation, while a player has the authority to speak with members of the organization, which explains the Chapman-Posey communication. While some of the young... Oh, this is just regarding... Zaidi and the season, and this is the final quote here that I have. They say, while some of the young players have emerged this year and produced, particularly Heliot Ramos and Tyler Fitzgerald, other prospects promoted to the Giants clearly weren't ready to perform at the big league level or were moved up and down without receiving ample playing time. And then here's the kicker. According to sources, the team's ownership has been sometimes puzzled with how players are constantly shuffled on and off the roster. So the big takeaway from that is that Scott Boras, essentially disputes and took issue with the reporting by Andrew Baggerly of The Athletic and said he was not contacted for the piece, which seems like it does seem to me like he should have been contacted, even if he had no comment, and he may have had comment. So it's a little bit curious that Boras wasn't contacted himself, given that he's a major party, of course, in this deal extension. And, there's also quotes in there that confirm what should be kind of obvious, which is that the board is not satisfied with the direction of the team, and the part about they wanted to see how the season's final weeks played out before making a decision on Zaidi. So the fact that they're not playing well down the stretch really doesn't bode well for him. Of course, there are 12 more games. They could go 12-0, in theory, but obviously that's not likely. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. And, the in and out of the hospital thing, tough to fire a guy who's in and out of the hospital working on extensions for you, but, I'm not saying you don't make a decision based solely on that. But anyway, I wish him nothing but good health and a speedy recovery with whatever the heck is going on there. But definitely noteworthy to point out that the Chronicle and Scott Boras characterized the way this Matt Chapman extension went down to be very different than the way The Athletic characterized this extension going down. And the fact that Zaidi was in the hospital was not referenced at all in The Athletic, which leads me to believe they weren't aware of that. Baggerly, who wrote that piece. That's my assumption. I don't know. Anyway, coming up in just a minute, we'll wrap up our thoughts on that and then get to your mailbag questions. So all of that in just a minute. And before we get into it, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, myself included. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in like I have this season. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action on sports in most states, including California. Yes, you can play in California. And I had a lot of fun. I think last Friday I took over more than 2.5 strikeouts for Logan Webb, more than 1.5 strikeouts for Grant McCray, which was, betting on 2+ strikeouts. I should say playing and picking 2+ strikeouts. It paid off for me. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, here we go. We're going to wrap up the discussion on this, what I'm calling a little bit of beat reporter drama, and move on to your questions, which address this drama largely, but also free agency questions about McCovey Cove Dave, and more. So thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers tomorrow breaking down, based on this report in the Chronicle, I guess these last 12 games are important to see how they finish. And the Giants are in Baltimore, and they're facing a pitcher with a 3.39 ERA, and they've got Blake Snell on the mound themselves. It's Albert Suarez who, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he pitch for the Giants at one time? Or Albert Suarez? Anyway, we'll be breaking down this game between... Yeah, he did. And he's having a nice season in Baltimore. Wow, I didn't even realize that. He pitched for the Giants in 2016 and 2017 for a total of over 100 innings and had a 4.51 ERA. So we'll see old friend Albert Suarez and break it down tomorrow. Anyway, getting to your questions, they're largely about Farhan Zaidi. I've got like 6 questions that are about Farhan Zaidi and essentially who would replace him if he was fired. So we've got Steve saying, what is your short list of president of baseball operations candidates? Bay Area Champ says, are there a list of candidates you'd consider if Zaidi is out? Alex says, what about Pete Patella stepping in? Joshua says, realistic replacements if Zaidi's fired. Another question about, is Pete Patella a candidate? Current GM Pete Patella. Outer Sunset Giants asks about Buster Posey's chances of filling in if Zaidi is out. And those are the questions. So essentially, what I'm going to say here is that there's definitely what I would do is I would go around the league and look at, some of the top teams and their general managers, because Farhan Zaidi is not the general manager. He's the president of baseball operations, and there is a difference. Pete Patella is the general manager. So you can basically, teams grant permission for general managers to interview with other teams if the position is a promotion. And the only promotion is president of baseball operations within baseball operations. And so I would look to the Orioles. I can't pronounce his name. I've seen it spelled a million times, but it's spelled, first name is Sig, last name is Megdal. And yeah, he's an assistant general manager of the Orioles, but my understanding is he's from San Jose, and very smart guy, and the way the Orioles have put their team together. So he's a name I would definitely look out for. And basically you'd kind of be looking for, well, I mean, it depends. Like they said, Buster Posey would have a big role in making this decision. And so by that token, I would possibly, like, it's not about who I would want. It would be about what do I think is likely. And you might find someone more like, Chris Young in Texas, where it's a former player, and not necessarily Posey. But there are some like GMs out there, assistant GMs. I'm not saying Gabe Kapler is a candidate, because I don't think he is, but Gabe Kapler is a former player who's now an assistant GM. And so if Zaidi was fired, if Buster Posey has this large input, I think you'd probably find someone who's a little more in touch with what it's like to be a player. And essentially, I'm not going to spend all this time coming up with names of candidates when Zaidi is still employed, because it could just be a huge waste of my time when I could be spending it doing other things when it comes to this podcast and preparing for it. So we will give you such an exhaustive list if Farhan Zaidi is fired, because then it would be a while before they made a decision on who would replace him. I doubt it would be Pete Patella, and I definitely doubt that it would be Buster Posey. I don't think Posey's qualified as much as I want him to have a voice. It is not just that easy to just step in and be the president of baseball operations. I don't know. I mean, the fact that Chris Young does it for the Rangers, maybe Posey is, but also I don't think you can be on, the board of directors and be an owner and be the GM or the president of baseball operations. So I don't think it would be Patella or Buster, but Patella would certainly be a candidate. I just think it probably would be someone else. All right. The next question comes from Steve, who says, would you prefer Snell or Burns this offseason? Blake Snell or Corbin Burns? How much do age, pitcher archetype, and consistency factor into your decision? And they factor in a lot. So I have multiple times commented on the fact that Blake Snell is going to turn 32 in December. And you're looking at, it depends. So those factor into my decision, because I need to know, like, it would be helpful to know what ultimately would it take to sign this player. And for Snell, you're obviously assuming that it would take a shorter deal because he's going to be older. He's going to be 32 all of next year, whereas Corbin Burns is going to be 30 all of next year. He turns 30 on October 22nd. So he's a little more than 2 years younger than Snell, but that means a longer term deal. And also you look at Corbin Burns, and the strikeout rate decline is kind of shocking. He went from 35.6% strikeout rate in 2021 to 30.5%, so a 5-point drop there the following year, down to 25.5%, another 5-point drop, like almost exactly each of those 3 years, 5-percentage point drop, down to now this year 22.1%. So from a high, and even in 2020 it was higher than it was in 2021. So it has declined every year since 2020. But I have looked at his velocity numbers, and they're not significantly down. I mean, his velo is actually up a little bit from earlier in his career. He's really not throwing a lot of fastballs. He throws like a cutter a ton, but yeah, his velo is fine. So I don't really understand what's going on with the drop in strikeout rate for Burns, but it hasn't affected his run prevention. And so it's a tough call. I'd kind of take either of them, but I don't know. I mean, Blake Snell has not seen a decline in strikeout rate at all. This year is almost a career high. He's at 33%. His career high is 33.3%. And the walk rate is what it is. And he does struggle with consistency. And so I'd kind of take either, but probably given the huge it's a 13-point decline in strikeout rate over the last 4 seasons, I'd maybe take Snell, and it would be a shorter term deal most likely versus, I'd rather get like a 4-year deal for Snell than like an 8-year deal for Burns, if that makes sense. But I would really take either of them, and the fact that Snell is already here maybe helps your chances. And also, though, Corbin Burns went to St. Mary's locally here in the Bay Area and is from California, from Bakersfield. I don't know if he grew up a Giants fan or not, but I am alarmed by that drop in strikeout rate. That's really all I can say about that. But the fact that the velocity hasn't dipped makes it less alarming. So I think that's up to like an analytics department to figure out what's going on there. So I'm not equipped to really, if someone could explain to me that it's not concerning, then I might say Burns. But it's really that fact alone that I'm leaning Snell. Snell is way less consistent. I think Burns is far more like steady Eddie. And has only thrown 891 career innings, even less than Snell. So less mileage on his arm for Burns. So it's really a toss-up. Like I think I would be happy with either player on the Giants for the next many years. So either one, whichever one they can get, I would be happy with. Heck, go get both of them. Probably not going to happen. But I would put some money maybe on the Giants getting one of these two, especially if they change, move on from Farhan Zaidi. I think you could see totally different behavior in free agency, and perhaps that trend of not signing pitchers to longer term deals would end. But there's some good reasons not to sign pitchers to longer term deals, especially when you're on the wrong side of 30, especially entering age 32. I don't know, Kevin Gausman, there was all this talk, but this year has not been a very good year for Kevin Gausman. So it was good for the first couple years, but year 3, not looking great already, and there's 2 more years after that. So that's kind of why I lean towards looking at age, but then you're committing longer term. It's hard, man. I don't know. It's hard. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, more questions and answers. We'll get to position player free agent targets and how guys like Tyler Fitzgerald and the season he's had factors into those decisions or decisions to get certain players or not. So that coming up and much more in just a minute. And before we get into it, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you could cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, while there's still baseball going on, I'm just checking out the Giants and their odds on FanDuel for today against the Orioles, this afternoon against the Orioles. And the Giants are moneyline favorites with Blake Snell on the mound at -116. The point spread or run spread -1.5 at +142 odds for the Giants. And the over-under set at 7.5. So you can check out that and more at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, here we go. More questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers tomorrow. Breaking down this game in Baltimore. The Giants are close to being eliminated. They're 10 games out of a playoff spot with 12 to play. So basically, they're a couple days away here from being officially eliminated, most likely. So we'll talk about that. I mean, it's just kind of meaningless baseball, but it's a big game for the Orioles. So I'm watching, just like the executive board or whatever they are calling it, the board of directors is watching to see how the season's final weeks play out. We're literally in the final 2 weeks of the season here. So the next question comes from Nelson, who says, What do you think the likelihood of the Giants signing Alonso and Ha-Seong Kim this offseason? So that's very specific, and whenever we get very specific about like two players, I'm going to say less likely, more likely no than yes. And here's why. I think the likelihood of signing a first baseman and a middle infielder is actually pretty high. At least one of, not those two specifically per se, but at least a first baseman and at least a middle infielder, I would say. But specifically, will it be Alonso and Ha-Seong Kim? I don't know. I think personally, Christian Walker arguably makes more sense for the Giants than Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso, not a very good defender, and also would require just a huge commitment because he's much younger than Walker. But the thing is, Walker is still really good and much better defensively, and you wouldn't lock down that spot forever when you've got a really good prospect like Bryce Eldridge already in AAA at age 19. Now, if you give Christian Walker a 3-year deal or something, it would allow you to kind of rotate Eldridge in and out of the DH and first base spot and vice versa with Christian Walker, or maybe you leave that spot open given if you're that high on Eldridge, So, and Ha-Seong Kim, I think, is a distinct possibility. Best friends with Jung-Hoo Lee. We'll get to a question next about Tyler Fitzgerald, but given what happened with Thairo Estrada this year and that he was outrighted off the roster, it's opened up, nobody has claimed that second base spot. It could be Fitzgerald moves there and they sign a shortstop, but basically there's only one middle infielder that has established themselves this year out of all the young players they've kind of tried out there when it comes to Marco Luciano and Brett Wisely, and recently Donovan Walton has reemerged here and others, Thairo Estrada too. Nobody but Fitzgerald has kind of really cemented a role on next year's team. So King of Norway says Tyler Fitzgerald is having an all-star level season and has played in 84 games with almost 300 plate appearances. The glove looks good enough to me at shortstop. I've seen enough and think he's the shortstop of the future. Have the Giants seen enough to ride with Fitz at shortstop for the next several years? And then conversely, NDE The Rock says lots of reports Tyler Fitzgerald is not a shortstop of the future. What do we make of that? Is this offseason Adames and Kim watch? And so I don't know what reports you're referring to, NDE The Rock. I have not seen any reports. What does that mean? Reports that he's not a shortstop of the future. So what I would say is that, defensively and offensively, there are still some questions with Tyler Fitzgerald. There's no doubt that the results have been there. If he could repeat anything like this moving forward, he's absolutely someone who should be on this roster as a starter. But the expected numbers offensively are significantly worse than the actual numbers. Projections have him as roughly league average as opposed to what he's been, which is about 46% above league average. He's been an impact on the bases. He's one of the fastest players in the league. And defensively, at shortstop in about 500 innings this year, -3 defensive runs saved and -1 StatCast runs above average. So kind of grading out as a little bit below average. And I think that passes what I've seen. He's been solid, but not great, and hasn't played much second base, only 38 innings at second base. But where in that time, +1 defensive run saved, +1 StatCast run above average. So, he's also played outfield, but their outfield is pretty crowded. And third base is obviously accounted for. But I've seen enough to say that Fitzgerald is a middle infielder of the future. At least give him that opportunity. I don't see them not giving him that opportunity going into next season. And so I think it is a Damas and Kim watch. And either one of them would probably slide Fitzgerald to second base. And I think that makes perfect sense and is worth trying. And it does complicate things. You look at a Marco Luciano and just another year for him where he didn't, like it said in that earlier report, he didn't get a lot of chances, but he also didn't look like he was ready to perform. And so what do you do there? He does have another option year, so you could just bury him in the minor leagues for another season. But eventually you've got to do something for this guy who was considered an elite prospect not long ago. So anyway, just to get to the last question, there was a question about Lamont Wade I wanted to answer. And does he not get enough credit? We're going to save these mailbag questions and get to them probably later on this week as well. But the last question from Gerald17, who says, thoughts on McCovey Cove Dave not giving back the Heliot Ramos splash hit on Sunday. And so ultimately, I think that, obviously it is the right of the person who catches any ball to do with it what they want. And that being said, if it was me, I would probably find a way to give it back to the player who hit the ball. But at the same time, I don't know what kind of, there is a negotiation that goes on, and I don't know what was being asked for. But ultimately, McCovey Cove Dave is out there every day, in the water. Just that is what he's trying to do, is get splash hits, so I get it. But at the same time, I would want Heliot Ramos to have the ball more than I would want it for myself, especially if it meant a lot to him, which it did to Ramos. But at the same time, it meant a lot to Dave. I mean, his whole life has been dedicated, not life, but at least since the ballpark opened, a big portion of his life has been dedicated to being out there. Now, frankly, I have seen a little bit too much, there's been reports of toxicity with McCovey Cove Dave that I've seen and kind of heard about. And then, I don't know, trying to get fame out of this little niche role as a kayaker who catches home run balls into the water. Just sort of weird to me. But ultimately, I believe in and will defend his right to do with the ball as he wishes, because ultimately he's the one who caught it. So, but I think the right thing to do, morally, would be to find a way to get it to the player. At least the right thing to do, the thing that would help me sleep at night would be to get it to Ramos. But I don't, it's complicated. It's complicated. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Get well soon, Farhan Zaidi. You are now Locked On Giants.